here we are. We are about to hear a great story about taking a program from start to finish and achieving results that matter for the business, not just for the sake of getting a checkbox of compliance. And I'm thrilled to have this conversation today with Jason LaPointe, CTO of Exostar, and Michael Parisi, who's responsible for all kinds of good things at Steel Patriot Partners, including getting programs to be successful for their clients. So gentlemen, thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So let's do this to kind of level set. Maybe a quick word from each of you about your roles, and then I'll get an overview from you, Jason, and we'll get into all the nitty gritty stuff. First from you, Jason, what is it like to be the CTO at Exostar?
Well, it's challenging. We are FedRAMP-moderate as a result of working with Steel Patriot and working in compliance-first atmosphere creates unique challenges for engineering companies, software companies. So it certainly requires focus and attention to emerging standards. I think to like the CISA Binding Operational Directive 2604 that came out recently. Staying ahead of the game requires a lot of attention and detail to industry, and industry experts like Steel Patriot certainly make it a lot easier for me.
Thanks for that. And Michael?
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at Steel Patriot Partners. As we like to say, business owners first mentality, security and engineering people second, and compliance people third. I think to Jason's point, we enjoy those puzzles and the challenges relative to the ultimate outcome of compliance, but doing the right thing up front to ensure that we're engineering and structuring a viable cybersecurity program that not only helps achieve compliance, but results in an overall business advantage for organizations.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep the eye on that ball, what the outcome should be, which is difficult to do when the check boxes are chasing after you, right? And those contracts are sitting there waiting for signature, and you don't have everything in place yet. How do you get there quickly? Cutting corners is not the answer for a long-term sustainability of the business. And we'll probably get into some of that today. You don't have to cut corners if you think about this and have experience doing this with several customers. So Jason, can you maybe give us an overview of what Exostar delivers as a product and service to your clients, and why compliance is so important for them?
Sure. So Exostar is part of the defense industrial base, at least in terms of how Microsoft views us and the industry views us. And we were born out of a consortium of owners, Boeing, Lockheed, and others that really are the base of the defense industry. So Exostar has deep roots in aerospace and defense, and we help companies, especially right now, smaller contractors that are doing business within the defense industrial base, contracts from the Department of War. The standards on those small suppliers are increasing in terms of the things they have to do to meet compliance so that they can participate in those contracts. And so namely, CMMC2 is the cybersecurity maturity model, is driving these suppliers to seek certification so that they can continue to do business with it, again, with the primes as part of contracts with the Department of War. It's a tall hill to climb. And when you think about, the strategy of how one might go about that, you really can either move all of your business operations into a secure, a FedRAMP secure boundary, which is massive. Take all your email, all your servers, all your machines, or in the case of Exostar, you can use our products, and because we are FedRAMP-moderate, many of the controls that you have to meet, the 110 controls for CMMC2, you can inherit from Exostar. And so the scope of the audit shrinks considerably. So what we're doing, what Exostar does, the value we bring to the table, is we allow these smaller suppliers to really to be able to participate in these contracts with the primes, the Department of War, and provide an environment where they can interact with CUI controlled unclassified information. And again, without having to lift and shift all of their operating environment, which, like I said, I think we know that in the MSP model is just massively expensive. They're able to inherit that position from Exostar.
Yeah, and maybe also just to kind of lay the groundwork, an overview of what that looks like for you. Clearly, you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting that then your customers inherit the value from that. What's your team look like to actually pull this stuff together to run your operations on a regular basis?
Well, we have our Office of CISO, we have about 6 folks there. And we have the compliance team under our Office of CISO is, and when you say run it, yeah, they certainly work with our customers. They're on the front line of intercepting any of our AppSec scans, things of that nature, and working with architecture. But really, to run the program, it requires a village, and it requires operations discipline that span beyond one part of the organization in terms of how we release software, who can touch environments, access control for things like our infrastructure as code repositories. That changes. So every part of the organization has to adjust their operating posture so that we know that we can safely walk into and out of audits.
And Mike, a view from you, because you get to see all kinds of things. So I'm sure you're hearing a lot of similarities for other organizations that you've worked with, and then you're probably also picturing, well, that looks the same, but I've seen some weird stuff on the side from other types of organizations that we've encountered as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about the relationship with Exostar is Jason, already alluded to. They are critical to the DIP, right? The function that they play, the relationship with the primes, and also the support that they provide. So when we work with Jason and his team, and when we look at the business outcomes that Exostar is looking to achieve, we're not just looking at Exostar as an organization. It's also understanding their clients and their customers, right? And what level of comfort and confidence that they need from a cybersecurity and also from a compliance and a certification perspective. And what I would tell you to your question is that a lot of organizations don't look at it that way, right? They're looking at it as if, well, I've got this one contractual term. What do I need to do in order to get through this? As small and as cheaply as possible. And maybe they're not thinking about what do their customers and their clients and the suppliers really need. And that varies depending upon the nature of the relationship. I mean, to Jason's point, when we're talking about CMMC and we're talking about the DOW and we're talking about flow downs and we're talking about subs, you could have a 10-person company that's been operating for 110 years that makes one bolt that goes into a Raptor. And they're now subject to this, right? And it's a tremendous uphill climb versus you can have a massive manufacturer. Exostar works with all of them, right? So I think in helping them design and operate this program, that the business outcome of they need to be able to serve everyone that's in their community is really, really important. And to your question, a lot of organizations aren't necessarily thinking about it that way. Some are. But some aren't, and it's a big educational effort in order to help them understand what's the impact to their own business, but more importantly, what we're talking about is the DIB and the entire supply chain from a national security perspective.
Yeah, so the Exostar's own supply chain, right? Your customers and their customers, and clearly your own business. You have to be FedRAMP, and then what you deliver has to be inheritable. Sure. And this isn't your first rodeo. Jason. You've done this many times, and so what were the challenges you were expecting to face, and how would you describe them to folks so they can kind of understand them, and then why was it so important to say, I don't want to really mess with these things. I want to bring somebody in who can help me with them.
Well, so the requirements for FedRAMP in terms of what exactly you have to do, there's not like a book that I can open and go to page 1 and follow the manual and I'm good. It's highly nuanced. There's certainly templates that you can use that'll get you a long way, at least in terms of laying something down. But then thinking about how your software operates, defining your boundary diagram and your architecture, and really getting in to the flows and realizing things that need to be FIP compliant, for example, and implementing that, and going through all of that is a pain, and it is a long process if the approach is trial and error. And what you really want to do is you want to walk into that audit with a high degree of confidence that there's going to be a good result. And so it's extremely helpful to have someone that has walked that walk, because instead of wondering and debating what the right approach is, you're able to move with speed. Someone who's been there before and done that. I've certainly been there and done that with a different company and learned a lot of lessons, and it took a long time. What I really learned is if you can take every step with confidence, you'll move a lot faster to the goal. And that's really what Steel Patriot was able to do for us. It's like, here's the configuration that works for your app config. We're going to write the IAC code. We're going to move it in the boundary, and you're absolutely going to get, which we did, a very clean, no POA&M bill of health at the end. And so it's that certainty that helped us move extremely fast.
Yeah, and this was driven not just because you wanted to. there were business opportunities, and obviously, not obviously, I think there were some milestones, regulatory milestones heading your way that you had to meet as well. And doing it yourself could have taken X amount of time. I think when you first engaged the Steel Patriot partner team, they had some initial analysis, and I think your CEO said, can we trim that off a bit and bring it in a little faster even, so we know we can hit these business targets that we're trying to achieve. Talk to me a little bit about that, because a lot of people listening to that probably go back to the first thing I said, well, that means cutting corners, but that's not what I heard when I talked to you before.
No. And what was compelling us originally, the Department of War had an effective date, I believe it was November 7th of last year, where these suppliers, the bolt for the Raptor supplier, can no longer self-attest. It's not good enough that you say you do it and put up your hand. Now you have to actually go through an audit. So we were very much aware of that looming November 7 date. And so originally, I think we were projected to wind up sometime in January. And yes, we worked together with Steel Patriot to pull that in almost a full 3 months. Yes, it was very much, it loomed large in our world, the ability to say that we were ready, we were FedRAMP-moderate, and could stand up to an audit, so that we could support our customers in their audit ultimately.
And Mike, what were you hearing on the street from all those vendors, right, that have to participate, and now they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Because they had the same question as Jason, right? We have this requirement.
They did, but I think there was more denial, right? And I think what's different, obviously, the maturity of Exostar being in this space for so long. Jason personally, they knew this one wasn't moving. Right. I mean, CMMC is something that's been discussed for a long period of time, but I think to Jason's point, all these self-attestations and the scores that were coming in were either overly inflated, or you had a number of individuals that maybe were doing those self-attestations and assessments that really didn't dig deep enough to understand the maturity of the program. And so lots of denial. You kind of had these two sides of the equation. You had some that said, well, we're going to sit and wait and see if this actually becomes real. And then you had those that were out in front of it, right? Like Exostar to say, we know it's real. And by the way, even if it slips, whatever it is, right, a month here, a week here, this is the right thing to do for our customers, for our supply chain. And it helps to address the risk that's been exposed. And I think to Jason's point, if you look at this through the lens of a C3PAO and from an assessor perspective, it's important to have that experience of folks that have been through it, right? I mean, Jason's been through it himself. Exostar's been through it. I ran this, practice for the largest C3PAO, 3PAO for 2 years. So I've kind of seen every different flavor that's out there. And what you continue to hear from the street now versus 6 months ago is, wow, this is real. And there's a lot of organizations that are behind that can benefit from leveraging things like Exostar solutions, as Jason mentioned, because of the way that they position themselves to make other suppliers successful within the marketplace.
Yeah, so holding that business objective to heart and having a good plan, that's beautiful. Executing is another story, right? One could easily hand over, here's the blueprint, have fun, Jason. Or you could have them step in and actually get their hands dirty, which is what Steel Patriot did. And so tell me a bit about that engagement. I know the team was in stand-up meetings and getting hands on code and helping to define the scope and actually building things. So tell me what that looked like and how that helped you manage your team and how that helped you manage the status and communications upward as well.
Yeah, I mean, staff augmentation doesn't do anywhere near the justice it deserves. It's embedding, Steel Patriot embedded themselves into the organization by way of, yes, stand-ups, daily stand-ups, tracking. We had at the leadership level 3 times a week, I believe it was, early morning stand-up calls across anyone who was involved in the program. So certainly supporting at that level. And then, day-to-day execution with the team. It wasn't through leadership. It was directly plugged in to the team with the product team and working alongside them to deliver what I would describe as DevOps work, infrastructure as code, deployment pipelines to make sure that we could release safely and securely into the FedRAMP environment. So it was very much a close working relationship, not unlike I have with employees.
And Mike, how do you, I guess what I want to know is your view of that in relation to other programs you've been involved with, where you probably come in and say, let me help you, because their teams are floundering, right? They might know how to build their product, but don't know how to scope in the rest of the organization operationally to meet the requirements. So maybe tell us a little bit about kind of the bigger picture that you see.
Yeah, I think from a success perspective, as Jason mentioned, the way that we look at this is we want to be part of the team. That's that business owner's first mentality. We need to be invested in the success of our clients and understand what that success looks like, not only for Jason as an individual, his team as individuals, but for the company overall. And, organizations that may want to try and keep us at arm's length, if they're not necessarily as successful. So those that let us in to become part of the team is really, really important relative to that success. Also, a nuance, but also very important within this space is the fact that we're all U.S. citizens. Right? That's a really important factor because there's many organizations that may have offshore support, from an IT, from a security perspective, makes sense relative to maybe business decisions. But when you start coming in contact with very sensitive information and when you start going through these high levels of compliance, that is in fact not allowed. So part of what we can do is augment some of those dependencies that may exist on resources that don't meet those qualification standards to embed ourselves as part of that team to help them achieve that from an overall compliance perspective.
And Jason, so the team is helping you scope and build and deliver and bring everything to market, and then comes the audit. And when I was speaking to you before, this is a very important piece of the puzzle. Again, if you guess at what you're supposed to do, you might open a can of worms that you don't necessarily want to open. So talk to me a bit about that whole experience and why it's important to keep the embedded aspect of this and the knowledge-driven aspect of this in place.
Well, yeah, I think back to the audit, and I remember having a call with Amy Ford from Still Patriot before the audit with the team, and it was something like, I'll take the lead. If there are questions answered, I'll answer them, or questions asked, I'll answer them. If I need you, I'll ask for you. Don't volunteer anything. And it was the best way I can compare it. It's that audit is like a deposition. Anything that comes out of your mouth that was unsolicited, that gives the auditor somewhere to go, is just that would be unfortunate. So it's serious business, and how you represent your business and your processes, and you answer those auditors' questions can be the difference. It very same business, same set of questions, and answered the wrong way can turn something into a nightmare. And so certainly trusted advisor, counsel, you name close partner. It was essential for a smooth audit experience. And for me personally, most of those audits, I made appearances. I was told when I needed to be there, and what my role was, and I attended diligently when I was told to attend. So it felt very controlled. It was, like I said, it's a very sensitive moment for a company like ours when it all comes together, and it can all be unraveled, with the wrong choice of words. So I feel like Still Patriot was a huge asset in getting us ready and getting us through that day, or those days.
Something to add there, Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say, being in the auditor's seat for over 20 years, completely agree with Jason. And, what's interesting is a lot of it is dependent upon the specific individuals, right, that are executing those audits. So knowing who those individuals are, knowing how they view the world, what their level of interpretation is, it's kind of like being an interpreter. Right, so understanding their language and presenting the information, obviously accurately and factually, but that helps them reach their conclusions as quickly as possible without having to grasp or ask for additional information or additional questions is really important. And I think, candidly, in our experience, the auditors appreciate that as well. Right? They don't want to sit there and try and have to pull additional information out. And if somebody does say something that maybe takes you down a rabbit hole, they don't want to have to go down that rabbit hole. But to Jason's point, now that it was said, they have to. And that's additional time on everyone's front. The other thing that Jason indicated a little while ago in the discussion, the opportunity cost here is huge. So if you miss that window to successfully get through your audit, not only is there millions and millions of dollars of direct contracts that could be at risk, now there's potential customers and prospects, like in the case of Exostar, that could be at risk, right? You're delaying your go-to-market motion from your solutions, how you can help the community, et cetera. And there's the scheduling element of the auditors themselves. Getting on somebody's calendar for a CMMC audit or a FedRAMP audit could take 6 to 8 months in terms of how far out they're booked. So that window is absolutely critical from an opportunity cost perspective, and understanding that and making sure you're all hands on deck and super focused on getting through that as quickly as possible is what's most important from a business perspective.
Yeah, and talk to me, and Jason, this is for you, the the ability to present what's inheritable and the ease with which it's inherited by your customers. Because to Mike's point, they're not free from the audit. They just get to leverage what you've done, and hopefully you've done it in a way that's easy for them to demonstrate to their auditor, this is why this is good and here's how we're using it. So can you maybe share a little bit about that and how, I'm presuming working with Steel Patriot helped that become a little easier for your customers and therefore make them happier?
Yeah, well, it's a black and white thing here. Either we do or don't have FedRAMP, moderate equivalent. That's it. Or can we, do we, are we or aren't we? And if the answer is yes, then we can provide our evidence package, and they can inherit our controls. I forget the exact count. In some situations it varies, but I think 85 plus controls, and so it's just that simple. If we don't have the FedRAMP badge, then it doesn't matter what we say and what audit evidence we're ready and prepared to bring forward. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count. So for us, there is no middle ground. And certainly for our customers, there's no middle ground. They won't make it through an audit with a partner that doesn't have FedRAMP. At least they won't be able to inherit the controls. That means every control goes into the scope of the audit. It grows it significantly.
Yeah, and I think, Sean, to add to that, the beauty of what Jason's mentioning is, this concept of adoption. So because the terms, the certifications, cybersecurity standards that we're talking about, whether it's on the FedCiv side or whether we're talking about FedRAMP being federal law, right? Whether you're talking about CMMC as part of the DIB, it is pretty black and white. And it does kind of give you this ability to have broad adoption and acceptance within the community by achieving that bar and achieving that standard. And anything that isn't within those laws or regulations, or for example, like the recently updated FAR, right, the acquisition rules that have come out, if it's not in there, then there's really no negotiation, I think, to Jason's point. So making sure that you align to what those requirements and those standards are not only ensures the success of the organization, but it ensures the quick success and adoption and acceptance from an organizational perspective.
Yeah, which we can't forget that this is the big supply chain picture, right? If parts start to slow down or have hiccups, government slows down even slower.
National security is at risk.
Exactly. We don't want that. So that's the ultimate outcome, right? Is better national security. Bring it back a notch or two. What were some of the outcomes that you experienced, business, operationally, otherwise, Jason?
Well, I'll start with the one operationally. A program getting ready for FedRAMP audit and thinking about FedRAMP is a commitment to a strong AppSec, OPSEC vulnerability management practice. So, number one is you go from the minor leagues to the big leagues real fast. So I think from an outcome, it makes your operation stronger as a result. Whether you like it or not, you'll get there. Outcomes from the business, again, this wasn't a nice to have, it was a must have. And frankly, Exostar's business is growing very fast. We are certainly the gold standard for identity access management, security, and collaboration, within the defense industrial base, and our business, with look at initiatives like Golden Dome and our participation in that project. It's created a tremendous opportunity for us, and the business is experiencing a lot of tailwinds.
So all those business opportunities, which is great, congratulations, doesn't mean you stop paying attention to what's coming, paying attention to what's next for you from an innovation and delivery perspective, what's important to you for your own programs and development processes. What's next for you, and how does Steel Patriot play into some of those plans?
Well, we're partnering now. Our products rather, they're all ultimately destined to operate in the FedRAMP ecosystem. That is the basis of our compliance posture, and we are the new products we're bringing to market. We start with FedRAMP. Over the last several months, we've added to our boundary there, working with Steel Patriot. So the answer is we continue to innovate in the supply chain. We continue to innovate in collaboration and in identity access management, and we do it FedRAMP-First. And certainly having a valued partner like Steel Patriot sitting at the table with us and in the trenches working with us makes that a lot easier than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, Sean, having executive sponsors like Jason that understand that and are willing to make the investment in embedding that as part of the culture of the organization makes it a lot easier. Because as Jason mentioned, now the organization is already held to a very high standard, right, from a cybersecurity and a compliance perspective. So it becomes easier to add into that boundary and what you've already established foundationally as additional products come to market, right? So scalability becomes a lot easier. But if you don't have that tone at the top to say, this is the bar that we're held to, this is the bar that we will maintain for these following reasons, it becomes harder, I think, to scale and add additional products that meet that same data classification standard and cybersecurity standard perspective.
I love it. You guys are both naturals. You answered a question before I even asked it, kind of giving some tips. I'm going to give you the final word, Jason. So maybe, is there something that came out of the program that you didn't expect, that you think your fellow CTOs or security leaders would value? Putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, it's tough. I think, again, perhaps the message is where we started, which is there's a lot of risk inherent in the program in terms of technical risk. You've got obviously your product is going to change to operate in a highly compliant environment. You've got internal processes that need to change. The way you were keeping tickets before, it won't work. Every part of the system of your operating system of your organization, not just the R&D DevOps product, but HR, finance, they're all touched. And so the ability and the willingness to move fast and change anything fast ultimately will be the governor on how quickly or if you can be successful. Because, going down that road, kicking and screaming and trying to rationalize away why a particular system isn't part of the boundary or something like that, it's a losing battle. And every moment, I think, as we talked about, like the timelines are tight. You miss that window, and now you're back to waiting in line again. So I think the advice would be, like, don't fight it, and certainly having someone like Steel Patriot at the table that is a clear voice of what works well, it helps accelerate many of those decisions. Like, here's what good looks like. We can tell you that. You make the decision within those boundaries, and that's creative and that's a great explanation. You don't want to bring that to audit. So again, the ability to change and rapidly change is your friend.
I could talk for hours about this story. We did spend quite a bit of time before, Jason. I'm going to force you to say one more thing, because there was a very critical decision that I think was instrumental in this program's success, which is not trying to build on top of what was there, but building alongside, right?
Sure.
Can you say a quick word about that? Because I think it's super important.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in terms of a platform-first initiative, which is you build the new home. So we had software running in Gov, and so we were already in a Gov subscription in GCC High. So, but we actually had to change the software to meet the FedRAMP compliant communication standards, configuration, et cetera, and we wanted to modernize along the way. So trying to do that in a production environment would have been extremely disruptive to our customers and to the business. And so instead, we built that new home, the new platform, if you will, the FedRAMP platform, through a platform-first initiative, and then we migrated customers to it. And that proved to be, and it's a strategy that I've certainly done before, but for us, it allows us to move rapidly without the constraint of worrying about breaking customers. So you can take massive steps in terms of re-architecting, redesigning, retooling when you don't have to worry about bringing your customers with you. So it was a big advantage for us.
Yeah, back to the business first. Got to keep those customers rolling and not disrupt them too much. Well, I'm not going to force you to say any more. I think the story is super cool, and I'm an operations nerd anyway, so this stuff excites me, and it's a good story. I'm glad to hear it from you, Jason, and Michael. Congrats on another successful program with Steel Patriot, and I know there are many, many more out there. So Jason and Michael, I'm sure you're both open to chatting with folks and sharing tips and tidbits as folks have their own questions on how to take their own programs to that next level, FedRAMP, CMMC, or otherwise. So thank you both, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your time.